In this tutorial, we're going to make a design for the 3D bicycle. And I've got the PDF that I've also sent off with the actual 3D bike file for reference. Now, I'm going to ask you to make your own design for this based on the tutorial that I'm about to create for you now. So the first thing we want to do with 3D content is we want to open up that UV map on which these textures reside. So we look at the PDF, we can see everything's laid out in a very flat format, and all the pieces pretty much are self-explanatory. In the PDF, if you were to scroll through, you'll see I've left some references to give you an idea of how an old bicycle might look, perhaps some shadowing, some rust, some discoloration. All these things will add to some authenticity and make our 3D model a little bit more realistic. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my layer window. And in my layer window, I'll go down towards this bike skin 4_2, and I will double click on that word to bring up the UV map. And there's a UV map that appears on the bike now. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save this as a separate PSD file. And then I'll go, once I've got my model textured the way I want, I'll apply it to the 3D content. So I'm going to go to File, Save As. I'll put this in my tutorial folder. And now we're ready to start coloring this. Now I'm just going to minimize the actual 3D file so that I can bring up the PDF and we can go back and forth and clarify exactly how you go about this. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to assign a gray on a separate layer for anything that would be metallic on this bike. The handlebars where the seat attaches to the bike frame. On either side of the fork at the top there would be gray or chrome kind of a disc, and then the inside rim of the tires. And I'm also going to gray out the bicycle chain, the sprocket, and then the assembly that would be the metal bars and the pedal. All right, so I'm going to go to Photoshop here now. I'm going to add a new blank layer. I'll call it Gray Parts. And now I'm simply going to go in with my selection tool. And I'll probably use the marquee, the polygon selection tool. I'll hit L. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to start to surround the areas that I'd like to color. Now, the gray will not go outside of the actual UV reference for the 3D content. So what that translates into, we don't have to be too particular about painting directly on those reference UV shapes that we see. So I'll simply go in and select the general area, which contains anything that would be gray with the handlebar assembly. And I'm going to select gray, and I guess I'll go with about 25% gray, and then I'll hit Option Delete to fill it. Now I'm going to go around this UV map, and anything that I want to make that particular gray, I'll make a rough selection and hit Option Delete to fill it. Now I'm going to leave you to go and fill the rest. I'll return with this completed and then we'll go on to the next step. So I've gone in and I've put the gray where I'd like the metallic to show up on the 3D model. And just to point out what happened with the tires, I wanted the rims to be gray as well as the spokes, and then the assembly where the spokes join that sprocket in the middle of the wheel. So all I did was I used my marquee tool and I Option Shift dragged shape I wanted and filled it with gray. So pretty straightforward, very general. You can see you don't have to be too particular with where this gray goes, because wherever there is no UV map, it will not affect the model. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a color that I want for the body of the bike. So in the context of the tutorial, if we would look at that PDF, you'll see that it's a very general yellow. I'm going to pick a blue just to deviate from this. I don't want you to reproduce exactly what you see in the PDF. Come up with your own design. Okay, and that's what I'm going to do with this tutorial. So I'm going to add another layer in my layer window, and I'll just call it Body Color 1. And I'm going to go with some blues. I think I'll name the bike a glider, so perhaps a sky blue might work to start off with. So I'll just grab a blue here. And once again, I'm going to get my lasso tool, and I'll just quickly go in and start to add the colors I want. Now, right here, where I've added the gray, I don't have to be too particular because I can just put the layer underneath, but what I do want to do is go around the frame like so. And I'll come across here. I can go a little bit above and into the gray because remember that's on a separate layer, so it's not going to show up once we switch the layer and put the blue below the gray. So I've got the body selected and I'm simply going to hit Option Delete to fill it, and I'll deselect it. Now I've covered up that gray I've put on, so I'm just going to move this layer down so that I do see where the metallic would be. I'm going to go and I'm going to do the fenders as well, and then once I've done that I'll return. Alright, so I've filled in the color for the body, and I've also gone in and painted the area with the tank. You can see very generally I've got the colors I need right where they should be. Now I'm going to put a secondary color with some detail, maybe some yellows, where the frames might join together, these different welds would be. So once again I'll add a new blank layer, and I'm going to go over and get a yellow, and I'm going to get I think I'm going to use my pen tool. I'm going to make a bit of a design on this so it's got a little bit of authenticity. So up here perhaps where the welds for the cross part of the frame, the main part of the body are, I think I'll go in and I'll start to block out an area like so. And I'll fill that. Okay, so I'm going to go around and I'm going to put these little bits of detail where these welds are, and then I'll return and we'll move on from there. I've introduced the second color, the yellows I want, and next I'm going to go in and I'm going to put the black in for the tires, the cable that runs from the handlebars down to the bicycle tire, the frame. And I think I'll go in and I'll put the red on my reflector, blue on the lens for the light, and I'm going to put a brown for the seat. And then I'll come back and we'll go on from there and you'll do the same. Alright, so I've gone in and I've placed some color over some of the parts that I spoke of before we departed last time. So I've dropped in some colors here for the lens on the front of the light. I've got the reflector red. I've started out with kind of a middle value sepia for the seat. We'll probably put a layer on afterwards and start to add some shadow and detail to make up for the lighting that wouldn't be optional inside of a game environment. Now what I did was I left the last tire for last because it's a pretty simple process to color the black. So if we look at this tire as it is now, we've got the gray for the rim and the spokes, then we've got the white wall, then we've got the black of the tire. So the way I accomplished that was to simply get my marquee tool, my elliptical marquee tool, and I'm going to Option Shift drag from the very center out. And I'm going out just beyond where I want to leave the white for the white wall. So once I've got that, I've chosen black for the color of the tire, and I'm going to put a stroke on the outside of this. So I'll right click, I'll choose stroke, and I've chose 30 pixels because that's going to cover up the tire just enough so that it blackens the tire on our 3D model. So I'll just hit OK, Command D to deselect, Command S to save. So now we have a very rough idea of what our texture is going to look like. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a bit of a logo to put on either side of the tank. And you can see that we've got both sides of the tank. So if you're putting text up here, which you should be as well as a design, you'll want to make sure that the text isn't backwards. So you've got to make actually a separate logo for each of these sides of the tank. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on a separate layer. And then I'll come back and we'll start to add some of the shadowing to imply lights and perhaps some rust and wear on the bicycle. Well, I've gone in and I've got my texture map pretty much finished with the basics. I've got my logo that I put on either side of the tank on the bicycle. And now I'm going to introduce a layer and start to add a little bit more detail that might make the bike look a little older, and also give it some shadowing as if there were a light source that were having a cast shadow in certain areas. So I'll go to the top of the layer order and I'll put a new layer in. And I'm going to start with maybe I'm going to go with perhaps a gray. So I'm going to go to my swatches And I'll grab maybe an 80% gray here. And I'm going to get my brush now. I'm going to go with a soft edge brush on this. And I'm going to bump up the scale on that. And I'm going to leave my brush 100% opacity and the layer itself, because I know that I can always go, and once I get the grays the way I want, I can always drop the opacity of the layer. Maybe paint along the bottom edge like so. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit V on the keyboard, and I'll hit 5 for 50% opacity. So now I can kind of see where this is going to look, where this is going to go. So we're going to start hit the bottom of the tanks where there'd be a little less light, because this would be sticking out on either side of the bike frame. Wouldn't be quite as well lit as the top edge. Now I'm going to go to the frame, and kind of the same thing. Perhaps underneath the frame there would be a little less light. And I'm going to put a shadow along here. And I'm going to do that with all these pieces where if the light source were vertical from the top, I would find shadows. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll come back. Now I've completed my texture map. I've gone in and put the shading that I wanted. I'm ready to apply it to the 3D model. So I'm going to open up the bike, and I'm going to go to the layer window for the 3D bike, and I'm going to double click on bike skin 4_2. And it's brought up the original UV map that we generated our texture from. So my objective is to get the art that I just created here onto that UV map. I turned off the background, and I'm also going to turn off the UV snapshot. I'm going to make a selection of the entire document, so I'll hit Command A. I'll go to Edit, Copy Merged. I'll then click on the UV map that's attached to the 3D model, and I'll paste it into that document. I'm going to turn off the UV map, hit Command S to save, and now I can close this original file out, and I'll just pull this off to the side, and you can see now we've got our bike and the texture applied to it.